All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Ian McCluskey, and the next hour is called Video Storytelling, which I think is pretty large and pretty open-ended. So I'm going to, Abraham invited me to do this. I was very glad and honored that he asked me to come and present. I felt a little bit over my head since it's been 10 years since I've been in journalism school and really legitimately a journalist of any sort. I'm a documentary filmmaker, which is maybe not necessarily in the journalism field. So I don't write for a daily. I don't do blogs and all of this exciting stuff that probably most of you guys do and are here to learn about. But what I can do is, because this is called video storytelling, is I can show you some videos and I can tell you some stories, which are the two things that I think I'm actually very fond of. But I guess, I feel like since this is sort of a peer-to-peer, kind of a peer learning situation where Abraham told me anything from someone who's never actually held a video camera in their hands all the way to perhaps someone who's, got a Pulitzer Prize or an Emmy Award on their shelf. So how many people use video in their their professional careers? Sort of like a third? That's cool. What kind of, anyone who raised their hand, can people just tell me sort of what types of videos?
I have an arts and entertainment website, so I don't do a lot of the shooting myself, that's something I'd like to do, which is why I'm here.
Okay.
We post videos of people dancing or music videos, and just something to give a little added interest to the events that we have posted on our site.
Cool. That's awesome. Who else raised their hand who uses video? Yes.
I work at a community newspaper. We use little flip cameras to interview people in the neighborhood and stick them on a YouTube channel.
Yeah, super cool. Anyone else? There's at least one other person that. Yes.
Tech blog. I interview at conferences, people use YouTube, and we're very short, 90-second clips.
Okay, good. Yeah, short clips, YouTube, flip cam stuff. And you raised your hand.
I work for a magazine that's both print and online, and so we've used video from everything from taking someone's grainy cell phone footage and making it into something that people can understand what's going on, and we also do a lot of interviews. We don't do a lot of video, but we do mostly just interviews.
Okay, cool. And if I have your time and the opportunity here for you to pick my brain from my experience, is there anything, can someone or raise their hand or shout out something that they would at least like me to touch upon or at least mention in this hour? I see way in the back.
How would you make an interview interesting?
How to make an interview interesting. Okay, I can think of that. Engagement?
Yeah, same thing.
Okay.
Engagement.
Okay.
How do you make a viral video that's not about a talking dog or a boy from Croatia or whatever?
Okay, yeah.
I'm interested in the thought process that exists before you start shooting, so I know what I need to shoot while I'm focusing on what it is I'm seeing, and also perhaps if I'm interviewing someone, I don't have to go back.
Yeah. That's a great, God, man, we could talk about that all hour. That is that's kind of the meat of a pre-production and production question.
Along those same lines, I work with high school students,
Uh-huh.
so I would like to know, streamlined ways of getting through the video production process. That's probably a huge topic, but just how do you make it super helpful?
Okay. That is a huge topic. I teach teenagers every year. We go to the Redwoods, we go out to Lewis and Clark National Park, and we also do this really cool program with teens in the Dougie Center who have lost a parent or sibling tragically, and they tell their stories. So I think I can talk to that, but maybe I'll save that towards the end.
Does the story really change dependent on the length? And then
Oh, God, that's a great question.
Maybe platform, many different backgrounds here, many different tools or names we're going after.
That's true. That's a great question. And I would say the short answer is yes, the storytelling absolutely changes based on your platform, your medium, your length and audience. I think obviously, you know, as writers, as journalists, we all know audience dictates and length, you know, whether we're writing a blog or for a magazine or a column inch versus word count. That really changes. How in-depth can you get with a character? How much background sourcing can you do? And that does also change the way you approach it in video too, even in the sense of pace, tone, and complexity of shooting. And I think it's just in literature as there's a poem, a short story, perhaps a long essay, a novella, and a novel. You can think of video in the same way too. There's sort of the YouTube hit, the 30-second, 60-second, all the way up to the feature documentary, which is intended primarily to be seen by an audience who's going to be sitting for 60-plus minutes and giving you their undivided attention for 60 minutes. And you have a lot more freedom, obviously, in those 60 minutes to really develop your character and really flesh out the story that you want to tell. One of the things that I think is really interesting is I hear a lot of journalists today saying, well, my editor says that I have to go get some video or I have to add some audio to my content, and it's they don't quite know where to start. And so I thought I would start with a little story about how I got started so I can share a little bit of my own background with you guys, and also to say that I think I've probably come out of a place where you guys, many of you guys might be now or turning the corner about to be. And I was at the U of O 10 years ago in the journalism school, and I was getting my master's in literary nonfiction, and I had come from basically a background and a dream of sort of the great American novelist type dream where I was at University of Montana for a while, and basically that dream is you have a typewriter and a desk and a nice view of the mountains, and you just write, and you write, and you're alone, and you have some coffee, and you write, and you have some whiskey, and you write, and then there's this stack of papers that you put with like baling twine, and you put in a cardboard box, and you ship it to New York, and all of a sudden, Knopf or something's like, hello, we love this, fantastic, great. It'll be published this fall. And you're like, woo! Exactly. So I came to the U of O, which had a... Actually, so that was my dream. And then I realized, well, I actually don't know how to approach a publisher. I don't even know how to write a query letter. I don't know the first thing about the business of selling words. So I started at U of O, and by my last year in the graduate program, or actually no, it was my very first day, I was lost on campus down there in Eugene. It was a huge Pac-10 school, if you guys have been down there. And I was in like the sub-basement of the journalism building, and I walked into a classroom, and there was these kids with lights and a chair and a camera, and they were about to interview someone, and they had a giant TV monitor, and I looked at this sort of chaos of lights and cords, and then I looked at the TV monitor, and I saw this sort of well-lit headshot, and I was like, that's how they do it. Ah. And I became so curious that then the teacher came and was like, all right, everyone sit down, let's get started. And I just sat down. And I was a grad student, and these guys were all seniors, entering seniors that had declared their major as electronic media. And so for their junior year, in preparation for their senior project and over the summer, they had basically written and researched a short documentary. And this was the first day of class, and they were going to pitch. So we were all kind of in a semicircle, and the first person to pitch stood up and said, let's say you want to land on the moon. President Kennedy says we'll put a man on the moon by the end of this decade. What do you wear to the moon? No one's ever been. How tough do your clothes need to be? What kind of shoes do you need to walk on the moon? NASA didn't know this. So they sent their astronauts from Houston up to Bend. I've got my family has a house in Bend. I can stay there. I've got all these locations scouted. NASA is public domain. I can use all these high-res images. I've got an interview with a 90-year-old astronaut in Houston, and I've already got plans to go see him. And the teacher was like going down the checklist. Yes, good, perfect, okay. He's like, good, I think your project's approved. And then she turned to me and she's like, and what's your pitch, mister? So I stood up, and I didn't have a story. I hadn't thought of one, but I remembered seeing lots of historic photos of Celilo Falls, this giant waterfall on the Columbia River, and all these wonderful old images of Native Americans dip net fishing on the river. And I know that my dad had told me when he was a young boy, his dad would take him to Celilo, and they would buy, salmon that was as tall as I am from the native fishermen there. And I was like, so I want to do a story on Celilo Falls. There are some photos I know. There's some descendants of Celilo, and I must have been more eloquent because I just sort of spit it out. And after the class was over, the teacher said, well, I actually liked your idea, but who are you? and do you realize this is a documentary film class? I'm like, yeah, but I'm really excited now. Like, I really actually like this idea. I think it's possible. And she's like, do you know what a coaxial cable is? I'm like, no. She's like, do you know what an RCA cable is? I'm like, no. She's like, do you know what drop frame versus non-drop frame is? I'm like, no. And she's like, well, what makes you think you can make documentaries? And I said, well, I'm in journalism. I know how to find people. I know how to interview them. I know how to make them comfortable. I know how to, in an interview, find selected sound bites. I know how to structure that into a narrative. I know how to gather photographs. I know how to work collaboratively in a team. And I know how to tell basically a story with a beginning, middle, and end. And she's like, all right, if you take the introduction to video production class and take this class, you're in. So that's what I did. And I thought I would share, it's a little embarrassing, but I thought I would share that first production with you that was made with no budget, no money. And I literally, that was the first time I put like a tape and a battery onto a camera and pointed the camera. And in one interview, we forgot the tripod at home. So we put a jacket on a rock and, and put the camera on the jacket on the rock to do the interview. So if you don't mind me sort of humiliating myself, I'm going to attempt to play off of the YouTube, because this is the only place this film, I have a copy of this film. God, it's hard to do YouTube over your shoulder. Okay, hang on. Mousing over the shoulder. Turn off the spotlight. This could be a little bit like the audio session that started with them not being able to do audio. This could be the video session where there's no video. All right, shall we? Please work.
First thing everybody remembers or recalls is the roar of the water. You could hear that roar of the water miles away before you even got by the place, and all of a sudden you come upon it.
There was a beautiful mist where there was the sound of the water.
You can hardly hear yourself think when you get down there, and you have to yell to be heard.
Celilo Falls made a terrific lot of noise when you got close to it.
That's when it's exciting. That's when it's really good.
It was almost as if you weren't aware at first, but then you became quite immersed in the sound, which was like a pulse.
I stayed there for hours and just listened to it.
Picture yourself on a scaffold, that water flowing that fast. would you get dizzy and fall down? Is this scaffold going to hold me? How many people can it hold?
The smell of salmon was everywhere. Salmon was everywhere. You had it on your clothes. You wore it home with you. You had it in your hair, your hands. You just smelled salmon for weeks and months.
You'd see fish from sunrise to sunset. That's all you just eat, you know, breathe, live. You're a real fisherman. Can you imagine that? Just grabbing that fish, bringing it back up, do that all day long.
It was a beautiful sight to see. It just was. I mean, there was people everywhere. There was a few tourists, but mostly there was just Indians, and they were pulling those fish out and hauling them up to the warehouse. And I get lost in those memories. I really do.
My wife got kind of disgusted with me because I believe I spent more time up there Celilo with the Indians than I did with her. But I don't regret it because it's I got to do more and see more than most people, and I think I enjoyed it. One of the most famous pictures that I've taken is of Chief Tommy Thompson and his wife Flora and his granddaughter Linda.
This picture was taken when I was 6 years old, overlooking Celilo Falls. It's sad to see this picture because that was the last time I took a pose with my grandparents overlooking Celilo. It's hard for me to explain right now.
They thought it'd be nice to have their picture taken overlooking Celilo because they know it would not be there and it would be covered up.
When they built the dam, there was no environmental impact study, no cultural study. You had the Eisenhower administration, you had the Red Scare, so they wanted dams to make electricity, to make aluminum plants, and people did it in the name of progress.
Anyway, I'm going to pause that just because I want to show you a bunch of videos. And the projector's a little dark. Is there a remote for the projector? No? Sorry. I didn't really shoot those people in silhouette. It's not meant to be the anonymous documentary. It's much brighter in real life.
Were they on deep background or something?
I think this projector's yeah, deep background, yeah. So let me move along to. I wonder if I'd change my brightness. Did that help make it brighter?
So when you started out with this, you had an idea of like what the story was. Did it change as you went into the filming process?
Oh, that's a great question. And basically, yeah, it was an entirely learning process. We didn't really know anyone. So I did know Ed Edmo, who's kind of a regular storyteller character here in Portland. And he took us up to Celilo. We spent several weeks just hanging out at the Longhouse in Celilo and in the Yakima Nation, just having lunch with people, hanging out, going to ceremonies. And gradually one person would connect us to another person. And some of the archive, which was really amazing, was one woman who you saw, or you didn't see because she was dark. She actually has a little farmhouse outside of Dufur and has since passed away of cancer, but at the time said, well, my uncle took color slides that day that Celilo was inundated by the backwater of the Dalles Dam. I think I've still got them. And she like went up to an upstairs room and dug around for a while and came back with a little yellow Kodachrome box held together with a decrepit rubber band, and it was like 24 slides of the falls actually being inundated by the water, and I think it's the only known or only existing archival material of that day where the falls disappeared. And he hiked up to a vantage point so he could actually see that. So I think one of the cool things of documentary is you learn and you uncover along the way, as is sort of the joy of journalism.
You keep using the phrase "we." So did you assemble a team to work on the project?
In this case, I had grabbed my then college roommate, Steve, who was an environmental studies major, and he was really interested because of the environmental angle, and I think wanted to learn some more filmmaking. So the two of us set out, and like I mentioned, neither of us knew anything about video production, so it was a learning curve the whole way. Hopefully this is slightly brighter. Yes? Awesome. Hopefully. Fingers crossed. After completing the Celilo Falls piece, I gave it to OPB, and they, like I literally gave it to them. I just handed them my master, and it's the only master we had, because we could only afford one tape. So we just gave them the master and said, hey, play this if you want. And so they did, and they have ever since. And that was my entree into OPB, where I worked for about almost 3 years, and I went from basically, making photocopies and researching and dubbing tapes to directing documentaries for them. And right at the end of my OPB stint, the Korean American Society came and asked if I would do a documentary on the Korean Society, or on the Korean community here in Portland, because they were celebrating their centennial year. And I didn't know anything about their background or culture or heritage. And as I learned a great deal about it, and so I accepted that sort of invitation to make a documentary on a topic I knew very little about. And for this film, this was done in 2004, and it was shot on a Canon GL1, which by then, at that point, was a decent camera, and by today's standards is less than a flip camera, really. It's less resolution, less pixels, and we used, for lighting, we used shop clamp lamps. So it was very low budget, but I'll play just a little clip if I can. This was an hour-long documentary, and I'll play just like a couple minutes of it to give a flavor. I hope a flavor.
All the ladies are here. They're all picture bride. Because men working in sugarcane in Hawaii doesn't make that much money to go over there Korea to pick a wife up. No way.
Picture brides are often young women escaping the hardships of Japanese-occupied Korea. In an attempt for a better life, they accept the gamble of marrying a man, often much older, whom they had only seen in a snapshot sent from the States.
My great uncle was about 26 years older than my aunt was. But when he was a young man, about 33, 35, probably very handsome looking guy. But my aunt was only 16 years old.
The picture brides would get off the dock and see the older man she was to marry instead of the young man in the picture. But by then, her fate had been cast. She could not turn back to Korea, not for the shame it would bring her family from a failed marriage, and not to resume a life under the hardship of Japanese occupation.
All right, so that's just a little bit of a teeny flavor, and one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to show you guys kind of a chronology of work is that in the very first film, what we did is we just interviewed people, and then we cut their interviews together and tried to tell the narrative in a non-narrated way. And in this film, I think because I had been working for OPB, I had learned sort of their style and their template. And so this is a kind of traditional historic documentary style where you have a sit-down interview with someone, you cut to archival footage of what they're talking about, cut back to them, cut to archive, and then and then, you know, seam the gaps together with narration. The next film I did after that that was in 2004, the Korean one. It was a pretty good film. It wasn't bad. It was aired on OPB, premiered at the Art Museum, and won the Northwest Emmy for Best Historical Documentary that year. And so, you know, we were, as a young, upcoming filmmaker, I was a little tickled. That was you know, the high point of the benchmark in my career at that point. Then the next project was 2007, called Eloquent Nude. And in this film, DVD's loading. In this film, it tells a story of Hang on, let me cue this thing up. It tells the story of Karis Wilson, who was the wife and model of the American photographer Edward Weston. So let me play just a couple segments for you.
My name is Karis Wilson. The first name is Charis, and my age is 90, plus, almost a year, and then I'll be 91, I think. Yeah, that's right. I remember lots of pictures, funny ones and straight ones. It took me a long time to realize that was me that I was looking at, you know, to slide myself into place when I looked at the picture. And the first thing I found when I discovered Edward and his photography was that it was a high art medium, that there was one hell of a lot involved in what you did and how you did it. And I pretty soon discovered that it took someone with the kind of eye he had to make it work. Eventually, I realized they really were pictures of me, and I did have something to do with it.
Let me give you one more taste.
The dunes were so isolated in those days, and there was that incredible silence that spaces like this where there are no people and no noise and a kind of roar of silence.
Weston woke up very early, as he always did, to catch the light at dawn, and woke up Karis, and they went out together with their equipment and a day's snacks, and wandered across these dunes in that dawn light. I think that you can imagine the moment in your mind with just those infinite forms that the early light casts across the dunes. Weston goes to work, and Karis leaves him, as she usually did, to work on his own.
I was a great sunbather in those days, so I couldn't wait to whisk off my clothes.
Suddenly she drops her clothing and rolls around in the sand, almost as though to say, inviting him to join her. And so he does by photography. And once they understand that there's an interaction here that's working for them, she continues.
Karis makes a series then of movements where she just flings herself and rolls down the side of the dunes in this very free and flowing movement, and Edward would call out, "Hold it." What the dunes represented was that opening theme in their work together.
The Karis pictures begin to identify not only her as an individual, but them as a relationship.
So in that piece, one of the things and one of the reasons why I wanted to show it was I was approaching a historic, another historic documentary topic where Karis, as a character, she was still alive, so she could give her story, but Edward Weston wasn't alive. He couldn't give his story. And so to have experts fill in that sort of story in the larger context of the artist and his relevance in American photography, that's kind of what their role in the film was. So that's sort of on the audio level. And on the video level, Edward created these great still 8x10 still photographs, but it was the middle of the Depression, and each of those still images, like just the film alone, was probably today's equivalent of like 30 or 40 bucks. So if you can imagine, you know, today's digital, you can take 1,000 photos and get them up on Facebook, but in the middle of the heart of the Depression, if you were gonna like take a photo and it cost you 40 bucks, would you, you know, and that feeding yourself cost 40 bucks that day or less, you know, what, how many photos would you take? So even though he had a great body of work, he didn't take a whole lot of candid snapshots, which is what the documentarian often relies upon for those visuals. So I had to essentially invent material. And in documentary, of course, the concept of reenactment is fairly accepted practice, because otherwise, you know, we couldn't tell any story before essentially the 20th century. And so anytime you're talking about the Romans or the Civil War or, I don't know, pirates, you have to do reenactments. And some reenactments we've seen probably on like those America's Most Wanted TV shows where it's like the feet of the killer going down the stairs and it's all purple. But so for this, I wanted to create a sense of verisimilitude of kind of being with them at that moment. So we shot all of that in Oregon with volunteer sort of actors, and we shot on Super 8 film to create the same grainy texture of the archival footage. And I'm sorry, again, this is like way, way dark. In a normal TV setting or theater setting, there's a lot of detail and greater range. This little projector, I think, is possibly on its last leg. But I wanted to show you a little bit about that and kind of talk about the necessity of having to invent, or at least create material for a film. And that leads to, God, this is hard. My latest project.
There's this exciting moment when the car pulls up and you know you're at the trailhead and there's an adventure that's to be had down the way.
And I think there's a point in your early 20s where, you know, it's not just skinny dipping, but you're saying, what if the rules weren't the rules? Why are the rules the rules?
It's kind of merging with what actually happened, with what you wanted to happen, with what you wish could happen again.
You know, we still talk about it. We still talk about that day.
That was just the trailer, the 40-second trailer to a 10-minute movie. But what that film is and what it represented was from Eloquent Nude, which was sort of the next sort of step in the storytelling process and craft for me, which was moving away from sort of the structured historical documentary template and adding in creative reenactments. What I really liked was shooting the Super 8 in Eloquent Nude, so I returned to Super 8, this time shot in color. And this time, instead of using talking heads in a traditional 3-point lit, framed up in a 2/3 composition method, I just used audio interviews. And so that, in a way, is, for me, going forward in my story craft, was actually literally going backwards in time and returning to a point of what we call non-sync video and non-sync audio. So the audio itself exists and can exist as much like a radio piece, and then the visuals, if you turn off the audio, tell a story. And together, those two layers work sometimes in tandem and sometimes separately. And so it was a great experiment, and it was a great kind of freedom. And I think the shorter the length of something, the more freedom really you have. Not that you don't have freedom in a long form, but Eloquent Nude, was a 2-year production process, and in a very low budget by documentary standards, $100,000 documentary. Summer Snapshot was, about $1,000 in gas, film, and beer, and shot in 3 afternoons and edited sporadically over several months. Eloquent Nude went on to some great success. It was really fun. It also aired on OPB, aired nationally on Ovation cable. It aired in all the countries of Europe and Canada. And that year, instead of winning just 1 Emmy, it was kind of fun. It won 3. So I got to add a couple more gold statuettes to my dusty shelf. More doorstops. And then this little piece, which was really fun, has recently been on the festival circuit, and it was just at the Tribeca Film Festival, so I'm pretty tickled with that. But the reason I showed that is a way to move into the concept of how does one starting out start talking about and learning how to do documentary and filmmaking, and what does that even really mean? And to me, it means a couple of things. It means basically all it really means is doing things that you probably already know how to do, but the idea that they exist in layers. It's sort of like, this is very nerdy of me to say, but in the original Star Trek, they used to play this weird game where there was like chessboards on certain levels. That's all I can think of. And it's sort of like, so you have photography, and that's like one chessboard, and it has its own rules and history and language. And you have writing, like print journalism, and it has its own rules and theories and practices. And you have video, and you have music, and you have all these, you even have like oral history and stuff. But what documentary is it's basically just stacking these up, one on top of the other. But the thing is as beginning out is you don't necessarily have to stack 8 layers up to tell an interesting story. And with Summer Snapshot, there's essentially just 4 layers. There's the visuals layer. Underneath that is the audio interview layer. Underneath that is some audio sound effects like birds chirping, water, and then under that is music. And you can do it even more simple with just audio and just video, or just music and just video, which I know is not necessarily revealing anything to you that you probably haven't thought of. But my point in saying that is that it's a really great way to tell a story in a different way, or a way that perhaps you're not used to telling it. And if you're not used to necessarily handling a video camera, but you already know how to interview, don't even worry about interviewing. Just go out with your video camera and try to tell a story visually using the language of the visual medium. I'm going to attempt to play this next tab over called Evening Commute. It's by nature dark to begin with, dark in color. So on this screen, I hope it's slightly better than complete darkness. So that was just like 2 minutes, and in some ways I would call that a documentary because it's like the original documentaries that came out from the Lumiere brothers. It's documenting a time and a place or a moment, but it was just images and music and a soundtrack. And one of the reasons why I showed it is it was actually the very first time I'd ever picked up a Canon D7 in my hand. And so when I first held that Canon, which is a DSLR camera, and I'm used to video cameras, I didn't really, it was a new learning curve, so I just assigned myself a little self-project, which was to go home from Northwest Documentary to North Portland and just shoot along the way. So I just brought the camera and a tripod and took the Max for a little while, as you saw, and then got out and walked up past North Russell Street. And I think one of the things that forces people to do is to isolate your intent. And if you can isolate sort of your intent, you can learn to explore in the language that perhaps is the new language for you. So if you already know how to tell stories, interview, don't worry about it to start with. If composing for video is something you need to practice, create some shots, create some small movies like this. Likewise, maybe if you're a photojournalist and photography is your strength, take a bunch of photos and then really practice the audio layers. I want to show one last piece, maybe second to last. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. If you're interested. Anyone still awake? That was someone local, but they had done it back a long time ago, back in 2003, and we just had it sort of still laying around in our collection, and I'd remembered it. So when I was just trying to think of a quiet, kind of calm piece of music, I pulled it up, used it, and wrote and said, do you mind if I throw this in? They're like, oh, I didn't even remember that piece. Sure. But that's a great question. And with Summer Snapshot, that's a local band called The Dimes that did the score originally for that. With Eloquent Nude, we used 3 or 4 bands. We had a funny, great group called the Django Files that did some Django Reinhardt's style jazz. We had a cellist from PSU do some original cello scoring. We had a really great guy who could play the dobro and the American steel guitar and did some great stuff for the Depression era. So basically, Portland is one of the very best places to find musical composers and scores. You throw a rock and you'll hit one in Portland. And chances are most of them are up and coming, so that they really are very eager to collaborate and work with you guys. This is something I didn't do. Wait, over here. YouTube. Thank you, YouTube. You're so nice. This is something I did not do. I recently saw it at the Aspen Short Film Festival, and it originally played in Australia. It's from Australia. It played at a festival down there called the Trope Fest, and it is just under 4 minutes, as you can see, so it's fairly short. So I think it'll be good to watch. All right, let me try to cue it to the beginning. Luckily, we have a pretty decent internet connection. And maybe I'll just watch it and then I'll tell you, because I met the filmmaker, and so I asked him how he made it and what. And I think the why is pretty obvious, but the how is the next part.
Don't you think it's crazy that we can spend all our life living with people really, really close around us, but never really expressing what they mean to us? Yet, when they die, we stand there and deliver some forced eulogy about them. You know, words that they're never ever going to hear. My dad's 83, and he has terminal lung cancer. Dad, this film is all the things I need you to hear. I've got to admit, I always looked at you as being completely indestructible, mate. I mean, there's nothing you weren't able to build or fix or solve. Yeah, those leathery hands that built homes and contraptions and countless things that I could never even hope to understand. Now just sit there clutching an armchair every day. An incredible mind just staring out of that window. Too weak to step outside it, yet too strong to not at least try. The same mind that used to burst alive with all these quick quips and stories and dry jokes now held the key, inspired me now to tell stories of my own. And while time and cancer have sapped your body of strength and wilted your frame, mate, I still see the immense shoulders that lifted me up so high as a child and showed me the world with completely new eyes. Now it's my turn to lift you up. I often wonder what you think of now, you know, looking back. It takes a pretty special person to be a dad. To write the rules and to provide and to protect, and you always did that. And despite your childhood being robbed of a family, I really hope fatherhood gave you love back. Because I love you in buckets, mate. And Mum, well, you guys just battle on together, don't you? The way you both just fall into each other now is just beautiful. It's amazing to watch. You're always managing to survive life's little curveballs, no matter where they come from. I'm grateful that you filled my being with courtesy and respect and ambition. And although I didn't understand it at the time, mate, I'm really, really thankful you said no as many times as what you said yes. And I'm completely in awe of your creative spirit for shaping who I am today. And what you struggled to express in words from a father to a son, mate, you sculpted into these amazing pieces of art that spoke to me more than any language could. Yeah, you inspired me, mate. You inspired me to see things differently. And somewhere amidst the solemn beauty and the tortured lines of your creations, I heard you speak to me really clearly. And if there's nothing more in time that I get to tell you, then these few words, at least you'll hear. I love you, mate. Thank you.
So, kind of a happy, sad spot. What I think is so beautiful about that, and what I think my sort of message in this session is supposed to, I hope, convey to you guys, is that video storytelling is such a broad term, and it really encompasses essentially anything and everything done with or without a video camera. It just basically means anytime you stick language and visuals and maybe even music together, you've entered the realm of video storytelling. So it is broad, and it's impossible to say, well, do this, but don't do that. And there's small technical things like the audio people were saying, turn off the refrigerator. Yes, you can walk away with that little tip. We could talk for hours on narrative arc and narrative structure, but what isn't that, what centuries of English literature and comparative literature have tried to get us to think about. And I guess I hope inspiration for you guys is to think of it in its very simplest terms. And if you're assigned to do some video reporting or video blogging or creating video pieces, to think of it not as a daunting challenge, but really break it down to its most elemental idea of what is story and what are those layers. And with this piece that this guy Jason did, is he basically had a friend who had a camera and was really good, and he said, would you want to come to my dad's house for an afternoon and we'll just hang out, and I just want to get some shots of my dad. And that was like their only objective of that day. That is just, and the dad was obviously cooperative, and essentially the location was fairly simple. They could control the lights, although they didn't really do a lot of lighting. They just used that nice window light and took their time to get the variety of shots, the close-ups of the hands, him doing some sculpture, him sitting in his shop, him on the couch, him and and the mom together. And basically he had all that footage, and what he told me about making it is he shot all that footage, maybe 100 different shots, and he didn't know what to do with it. Actually, he had no story. And so he basically sat on it for months and months and months, and he couldn't figure out how to make the story that he wanted to tell. And one night, he just woke up, and he felt like he had all these things to say. So he just grabbed a small audio recorder next to the bedside, a little like Zoom H2, not even like an H4, and hit record and just spoke out his heart. And that became the audio layer to that story. So I think that's a wonderful template and a wonderful example. And I'm sorry we're probably out of time, but in some ways, speaking to how do you do efficient workflows with teenagers, how do you prepare for a video shoot? I say strip it down to its most elemental. Don't try to think of everything and anything, make your stories complex. That the beauty of video storytelling is in its immediacy, its time-based approach to render an emotion, and just really concentrate on either good audio or good video. And if you can't do both, bring a friend along, because it is, with all these layers, collaborative. So a good photographer and a good audio recorder can make a film. A good journalist, print journalist, and a good video person can make a film. So I hope this presentation was useful, and I hope more inspirational. And I'm happy to answer any specific questions, technical questions. And I do know what a coaxial cable and an RCA cable is today, and drop frame. So I'm happy to answer all of those questions. But I appreciate your attention and your listening. So thank you very much.